Sydney an afternoon that seemed ordinary, until cold gunshots rang out across a crowded block. In an instant, calm evaporated, replaced by panic and fear. The person who collapsed wasn't a criminal or a gang member, but a lawyer, someone who had stood up for justice and represented the trust of an entire community. What made it even more shocking was how fast it happened. A daytime assassination in a public place. The shooter moved like a ghost, walked up, pulled the trigger, then vanished into the crowd before anyone could even process what they'd seen. So who wanted that lawyer dead? A former client holding a grudge? A buried political dispute? Or a hidden hand operating in the shadows where everything has a price, even a human life? If you want to know what happened to lawyer Ho Le Dinh and who truly stood behind this blood-soaked plan, hit like, share, and subscribe, and join Vietnamese Case Files as we dive into the case that shook Australia's Vietnamese community, where justice and darkness were separated by a single gunshot. Before we begin, a quick note. All content in today's video has been researched and compiled by our team from multiple sources. If there are any inaccuracies or details that need correction, please leave a comment below so we can update and revise promptly. It all happened on January 23, 2018. In Bankstown, a suburb in western Sydney known for its immigrant population, especially the Vietnamese community that settled there after the 1980s. Bankstown City Plaza is usually a lively gathering spot for families, seniors, and young people. But that afternoon, it became a scene of horror. As people casually chatted and strolled around, a burst of gunfire suddenly shattered the peace. After the terrifying sounds, everyone scattered in chaos. And then in the middle of the crowd, people realized in shock that a man had already gone down. Blood pooled around him. The attacker, meanwhile, had already slipped into the crowd and escaped. At the time, the area had a few hotspots, but locals never imagined violence would erupt in broad daylight in such a busy public place. The incident immediately raised fears about how brazen criminals had become and how safe public spaces really were for Sydney's Vietnamese community. Just minutes later, New South Wales police arrived. Because the victim had been having coffee with an acquaintance, his identity was quickly confirmed. It was Ho Le Dinh, a prominent Vietnamese-Australian lawyer in Sydney. Mr. Ho was born in 1953 in Vietnam, and later migrated to Australia in the late 1980s. In his early days in a new country, Ho Le Dinh studied English while taking on all kinds of manual jobs to make ends meet. With sheer determination, he went on to study law and political science at the University of New South Wales, becoming one of the few Vietnamese Australians of that era to graduate in law. After graduating, he quickly built his reputation in the community and became a well-known lawyer among Vietnamese people in Sydney. Friends described him as strong-willed, outspoken, and at times uncompromising. He wasn't afraid to speak up against social injustice and was active in fighting for justice. Colleagues said he often quoted Albert Einstein, "The world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing," to express his belief in taking action. That bluntness made Ho Le Dinh influential but also controversial within the overseas Vietnamese community. He had like-minded friends who cherished him deeply, but he also had plenty of rivals who envied him and clashed with him fiercely. In his legal career, Ho Le Dinh specialized in criminal law and handled many high-profile cases. Most of his clients were Vietnamese Australians. He once represented a Buddhist monk in a defamation lawsuit against a Vietnamese-language newspaper. Most notably, he served as defense counsel for Philip Nguyen, the defendant in the 2010 shooting of police officer Bill Cruz. Ho Le Dinh even appeared at the 2013 appeal hearing, when his client Philip Nguyen received a longer prison sentence. Taking on cases involving figures linked to organized crime highlighted his reputation and nerve within the legal profession, but it also came with serious occupational risks. Beyond practicing law, Ho Le Dinh also made academic contributions. He painstakingly compiled and published an English-Vietnamese legal dictionary, providing a valuable reference for the bilingual legal community. Colleagues said he was highly active in legal research and genuinely passionate about his work. He also took part in Vietnamese community activities in Sydney, readily speaking up to protect the rights and interests of fellow Vietnamese. In his personal life, Ho Le Dinh had a happy family with his wife and 5 children. 3 of them were still quite young at the time of his death, which made the tragedy all the more heartbreaking. Friends said he was a devoted husband and father. Every day after work, he often stopped by Happy Cup Cafe in Bankstown, where he had previously been a co-owner to meet friends and clients. The place was so familiar to him that he jokingly called it his second office. Anyone who needed to find him could simply go to the cafe, because Ho Dinh was open and generous. That fateful lunchtime was no different. He chose an outdoor table, sipping tea while chatting with a few longtime friends. Little did he know that very routine, so harmless on the surface, would be exploited by someone with murderous intent. From the outset, New South Wales police determined this was not a random attack, but a targeted killing. Witnesses said the shooter was disguised as a construction worker, wearing a high-visibility vest and a long green jacket. He coldly approached Ho Dinh from behind while the lawyer was having coffee with friends and opened fire. Ho Dinh was hit 3 times in the back at close range and collapsed on the spot. The gunman then fled. Most people present were panicked, shocked, and terrified by how brazen the attack was. So few managed to react in time. A handful of brave bystanders tried to chase him, but he escaped in the chaos. The scene was quickly sealed off for investigation. That same evening, January 23, 2018, investigators collected key evidence. From security cameras around Bankstown Plaza, they recovered footage showing the gunman walking up to the victim, firing, and then running away. The image wasn't clear enough to make out his face, but it did show his build and distinctive clothing. Several witnesses gave similar descriptions of a man in a high-vis vest, wearing a baseball cap with notably dark complexion that they associated with Pacific Islander appearance. In particular, internal intelligence suggested the killing may have been a contract hit stemming from a major financial dispute involving a local criminal gang. And just days later, police concluded the attempted hit was rooted in a dispute over roughly 200,000 AUD. That large sum became the spark for the conflict between Ho Dinh and the mastermind behind the assassination. This money trail helped steer investigators toward the victim's business dealings and his client network. Ho Dinh was a veteran criminal defense lawyer who had represented a number of figures linked to organized crime in the community. As a result, the task force did not rule out the possibility that he was killed in retaliation or taken out over hidden vendettas tied to underworld dealings. Task Force Commander Scott Cook of the New South Wales Police even suggested that an outlaw motorcycle gang could have been involved. The shooter's calculated boldness and just enough professionalism led investigators to suspect this was not a lone actor crime. Those involved appeared to have planned carefully, from learning the victim's routine to choosing a crowded public setting to maximize panic to having an escape plan ready. Police also thoroughly pursued statements from everyone who had been at the scene. Fortunately, one witness vaguely recalled the license plate of a white van that carried the gunman away from the scene. From that lead, police traced the van's registered owner, Analosa Akani, a name that had never appeared in criminal records before. Moreover, the owner was a woman and was pregnant, making it highly unlikely she was the shooter. However, that very detail raised another suspicion: was she being used as a front for someone else? Police continued digging and found the name Abraham Sinai Analosa's husband. Unlike his wife, he had been linked to a number of murky incidents involving gangs in Australia. Sinai also had a close associate named Kelikolio, said to be a well-known underworld figure. So did Abraham Sinai have a grudge against lawyer Ho Dinh and use his wife's name while recruiting his associate to carry out the plot? This theory prompted police to immediately begin surveillance of the Sinai-Analosa couple. They did not make arrests right away, instead quietly monitoring every move to gather more evidence, while also placing an alert at border control in case suspects tried to flee overseas. Sure enough, just 3 weeks later, on the morning of February 13, 2018, the alert system at Sydney Airport was triggered. Arthur Kelikolio, suspected of being the shooter, was checking in for a one-way flight to Bali. New South Wales police moved in at the departure gate and arrested Kelikolio. He was caught completely off guard, managing only to keep his head down to avoid cameras as he was escorted away. That same day, police conducted an urgent search of Kelikolio's residence in Hammondville and seized several key items for the investigation. With the suspected gunman in custody, investigators gained stronger footing to work their way up to the people behind him. In parallel, surveillance also produced enough evidence to charge Analosa Akani. By early March 2018, Analosa was arrested. She was charged as an accessory to murder for allegedly hiring Kelikolio to assassinate Ho Dinh, acting as an intermediary for the mastermind. In reality, police suspected her husband Abraham Sinai was the one pulling the strings. Even so, at that time they lacked direct evidence against him. Analosa appeared in court while pregnant, was denied bail, and refused to provide much beyond vague denials. At this point, the case file formally listed two suspects: Arthur Kelikolio, the alleged shooter, and Analosa Akeni, the alleged person who hired him. It would take more than a year before police completed the final piece of the criminal puzzle. Based on the statements from Arthur Kelikolio and Analosa Akeni, along with phone evidence and financial transactions, investigators gradually tightened the net around Abraham Sinai. Knowing that waiting longer could give him time to flee or destroy evidence, police decided to move in. In the early hours of May 30th, 2019, officers from the Organized Crime Squad, carrying heavy firearms, surrounded a house in Leppington. The moment Abraham Sinai opened the door, he was taken down, handcuffed, and brought in, leaving neighbors stunned. During searches of the Sinai couple's residence, police seized multiple pieces of evidence, including money transaction documents and phone communications indicating Sinai had planned to hire Kelikolio to shoot lawyer Hole Dinh. That same day, Abraham Sinai was charged with murder. By mid-2019, all three people connected to the killing of lawyer Hole Dinh had been arrested. The case moved into formal legal proceedings, awaiting the day the suspects would answer for their crimes. After more than a year of relentless investigation, Sydney police had brought the entire shocking plot and everyone involved into the light. Of the three, Arthur Kelikolio, 38, was identified as the one who directly fired the shots that killed Hole Dinh. He was of Pacific Islander background, medium build, with dark skin matching eyewitness descriptions of the man in a high-visibility vest at the scene. Before joining the assassination, Kelikolio was not considered a particularly high-profile figure in organized crime. However, his boldness and the way he tried to escape revealed a calculating and dangerous mind. After pulling the trigger, Kelikolio quickly blended into the crowd and got into a vehicle to leave. He vanished without a trace that very afternoon, forcing police into a race against time. Few suspected that only about 2 weeks after the shooting, Kelikolio had quietly booked a one-way flight to Bali, Indonesia, to disappear. This suggested he had an escape plan in place beforehand. In the end, Arthur Kelikolio's plan failed when he was arrested the moment he appeared at Sydney International Airport. Abraham Sinai, 34, was believed to be the mastermind behind the assassination. Sinai lived in the Leppington area of Sydney. According to investigators, Abraham Sinai had a prior money dispute with lawyer Hole Dinh and paid a large sum to hire Arthur Kelikolio as the hitman. Sinai's motive may have been driven by greed and resentment. A major financial loss or a hard-to-collect debt may have fueled his determination to deal with Mr. Hole Dinh. At the time of his arrest, Abraham Sinai looked educated and respectable, which made it hard for many to imagine he had ties to the underworld. However, sources suggested he had behind-the-scenes links to an outlaw motorcycle gang operating in Sydney. Those connections may have helped Sinai reach Kelikolio, an underworld figure willing to shoot for money. In his personal life, Sinai and Analosa were married and had children, yet he pulled his own wife into the criminal plan, revealing a chilling level of coldness and selfishness. After the killing, Sinai stayed in Leppington, likely believing that as the one pulling strings from behind, he would never be exposed. He never expected that more than a year later, police would storm his home with decisive evidence, ending the mastermind's role in the shadows. The final figure, Analosa Akeni, 35, was Abraham Sinai's wife and the third person implicated in the case. Ironically, she was pregnant and already a mother of 4 young children at the time of her arrest. Prosecutors alleged that Analosa played a key supporting role for her husband by helping monitor lawyer Hole Dinh and by lending Kelikolio the family's van as a getaway vehicle. Analosa's involvement sparked shock and outrage, because few could imagine a mother of 4 would agree to take part in such a cold-blooded plan. However, one theory suggests she acted out of obedience and fear of her husband rather than personal malice. At her first court appearance in March 2018, Analosa even appeared frail due to pregnancy and requested an adjournment because of pregnancy complications. Even so, her initial statements to police showed evasiveness and dishonesty. Analosa claimed she couldn't remember what she did on the day it happened, an excuse that led authorities to suspect she was deliberately hiding her true role. The case was lengthy and complex, partly because of its severity, and partly because each defendant had a different role and level of cooperation. As for Anna-Losa Akini, because she was pregnant and played an indirect role, her prosecution was separated into a standalone matter with the charge of being an accessory after the fact. In late 2020, she pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 2 years and 7 months in prison. The sentence drew controversy for being relatively light for a homicide-related case, but the court likely weighed her responsibility for raising young children and her cooperation in providing evidence against her husband. In fact, it was largely due to Anna-Losa's later testimony that the hidden extent of Abraham Sinai's role was brought to light, giving prosecutors enough evidence to charge and convict him. Meanwhile, Abraham Sinai maintained his innocence, so he went to a jury trial. In mid-2021, the trial took place at the Supreme Court of New South Wales and drew major public attention. Prosecutors argued that Sinai orchestrated everything. He hired Kelakolio, used his wife as an accomplice, and acted out of an irreconcilable money dispute with the victim. Evidence against Sinai included text messages and phone calls between him and the two co-accused before and after the shooting, as well as an unusually large payment he made around the same time. Kelakolio purchased plane tickets to flee. Prosecutors especially stressed that the killing of Hole Dinh was not the work of a criminal mastermind, but rather clumsy and amateurish. This point was meant to rebut the defense's claim that the plan was only meant to intimidate, not to intentionally take a life. The defense argued that Sinai merely encouraged Kelakolio to collect a debt and waited in the car as the driver. And they also cited Sinai's anxiety and mental health issues in an attempt to reduce his culpability. But the jury was not convinced. In June 2021, they unanimously found Abraham Sinai guilty of murder, confirming his role as the instigator and accomplice in the killing of Hole Dinh. As for Arthur Kelakolio, seeing the inevitable outcome after Sinai was convicted, he changed his stance. Instead of contesting the case in court, Kelakolio chose to plead guilty in hopes of leniency. This saved court time and also reflected the fact that he could not realistically deny the overwhelming evidence CCTV footage, witnesses who chased him, and his arrest at the airport. With the victim gone and 2 of the 3 defendants having pleaded guilty, the case moved into sentencing amid intense attention from the victim's family and the Vietnamese community. In February 2022, at the Supreme Court of New South Wales, the sentencing hearing for Arthur Kelakolio and Abraham Sinai took place. Presiding Judge Robert Holm used strong words to condemn the defendants' actions. He called the daytime shooting of lawyer Hole Dinh, carried out with many people nearby, an act of extreme audacity that terrified society at large. Judge Holm also rejected the defense's argument that the killing was unintentional. In the court's view, the intent to kill was unmistakable. The defendants brought a loaded gun and fired multiple shots at close range, so it could not be dismissed as merely a warning shot or shooting at the legs, as Kelakolio claimed. The court further affirmed that whether the assassination plan was professional or not did nothing to lessen the gravity of the crime. The consequences of the defendants' actions were immense. An innocent person lost his life, the family suffered an irreplaceable loss, and the community was shaken and left fearful by the criminals' brazenness. After consideration, the court sentenced Abraham Sinai to 30 years imprisonment, with a non-parole period of 22 years and 6 months. Arthur Kelakolio, because he pleaded guilty early, received a lesser sentence of 27 years, with a non-parole period of 20 years and 3 months. In total, the 2 men directly responsible for the killing of lawyer Hole Dinh were sentenced to 57 years in prison. As the sentences were handed down, both Sinai and Kelakolio remained silent, showing no obvious emotion. They appeared at the hearing via video link from prison, arms folded across their chests, heads lowered in grim silence. Their coldness only deepened the anger of the victim's family and those in attendance, who saw it as a lack of remorse. Still, the harsh sentences brought a measure of justice for the deceased. As of 2025, the defendants have no realistic chance of freedom anytime soon. All appeals were rejected, and the sentences were upheld for both the mastermind and the gunman. The perpetrators have now paid the price behind bars for their brutal actions. The assassination of lawyer Hole Dinh sent powerful shockwaves through the Vietnamese community in Australia, especially among Vietnamese-Australian lawyers. For the first time, they witnessed a colleague, someone who represented the law and justice, being brutally murdered as a revenge target. Grief cast a dark shadow over the community. Friends and acquaintances lost a principled man who dared to speak up for them. A family lost a husband and father, its main pillar, and the wider community lost a strong voice of conscience. The Vietnamese-Australian Lawyers Association held a memorial and honored Ho Le Dinh's contributions to the community. Many tributes in both Vietnamese and English language media in Sydney praised him as someone who always fought for fairness. Even if his style could be controversial at times, his devotion to the community was undeniable. And although the perpetrators were punished, the Ho Le Dinh case still leaves many unanswered questions. Police once hinted that others may have hired Sinai to arrange the hit, possibly involving criminal gangs. However, to this day there have been no further arrests, and the secret behind the 200,000 AUD and those connected to it may remain buried with time. The case also left a costly lesson about trust and caution. Ho Le Dinh was known for being friendly and open, often meeting clients in public cafes, something that made him accessible to the community, but also, inadvertently, gave criminals an opportunity. If there had been stronger security measures or greater vigilance, perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented. And you, what do you think about this ending? Do you believe the sentences were handed down to the right people for the right crimes? Share your thoughts in the comments. And before we say goodbye, don't forget to like and follow Vietnamese Case Files so you don't miss our next cases. Goodbye, and see you again at this time tomorrow.